Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today we are going to continue our how to LS swap something with part 6, putting our gas tank in. Now I know that might sound like a really easy job, and usually it is, but on this one, since we are LS swapping, we're going to a fuel injection setup over a carbureted setup. It's a little more involved than that, and especially the way we're going to go about doing it. A lot of the times people try to get away with running an external pump, and you can do that and that's fine, but as I explain later, that has its drawbacks, and I much prefer to do it the way we are doing it, which is getting a new tank in with the pump inside of it. So we're going to take you down that route, and trust me when I say this, it is the better way to go. Our vehicle in question is a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air, but I tried to make this as applicable as possible. Typically old cars, old American cars at least, all work generally the same way, but there are some things you're going to have to look out for that are bespoke to your vehicle, and I point that out along the way as we go. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and thank our incredible sponsor, Summit Racing. Summit Racing has sent over all kinds of incredible parts. They've been the best sponsor I've ever worked with. They have an incredibly easy website. They have great returns, great customer support, fantastic products, all at a competitive price. Make sure you buy all your speed parts from summitracing.com. So I've already filmed the entire fuel system. The video ended up being almost an hour long. I didn't quite like that, so I'm breaking up the how to install the fuel system into 2 separate parts, so it's a little bit easier to digest. You don't have to sit there and watch a big long video. You can watch 2 shorter videos. I feel like it breaks it up a little bit more and makes things a little bit more manageable for you, but this is how to, start your fuel system, and we will be concluding that in another video in part 7, which will come out very soon, but make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. Before we get started doing anything fun on the car, we're going to go back to school a little bit because there are 2 basic ways to hook up your fuel system on an LS swap. The top one is cheaper, but it's a little more labor intensive and requires a little bit more know-how because you do have to do some modification. The basic system is you have your stock tank. This is what would come in your car. And then you have the pickup tube come out, down into a pump close to the tank on the frame. And then that feeds a regulator, which regulates down to 50 psi. Whatever fuel it isn't using is then returned back into the tank. And that's where your modification is going to be needed to be made, right up into the pickup. You're going to have to weld or solder or seal it in some way, and you're working with gasoline. It can be dangerous, and if you get it wrong, bad stuff happens. So that is something to consider. After the regulator, it feeds into your fuel filter, and then goes to your engine, and all the fun stuff happens. So that will feed your fuel injectors at the 58 psi, but look up your injectors if you're using aftermarket ones. It might be different. So that is the first way to go. It is cheaper, but as a result, these fuel pumps that are outside of the tank are quite a bit noisier. You're going to hear them when you turn the car on, or maybe even if it's running if your exhaust isn't super loud. Also, they don't last as long because they aren't sitting in a tank full of cool gas. That's something to consider too. Also, when the tank gets low on gas, this pump can aerate, which is no good. You're going to lose fuel pressure and the car's not going to run. It's going to stumble and bumble around. So I prefer this solution. The drawback of this solution is it is a little bit more expensive as you have to buy a whole new tank, which comes with a pump inside of it. Ours happens to feed 100 psi, but that's way too much for our fuel injectors. It's almost double what we need. So that comes up and out of its pickup into the regulator, which we're going to mount on the frame. That's going to regulate down to 58 psi, get fed into our filter, and then the rest of the gas is going to be sent to our engine, making our power. Whatever psi it isn't using, whatever fuel it isn't using, gets sent back to the tank. So this is constantly cycling. This pump is always going to be ran at what it wants to be ran. It's not sitting there being choked down. So that's also a nice advantage for the tank and the pump. It stays cooler, stays quieter, but it is more expensive. However, I do recommend this way, and all the links to all the stuff we're using today are located down below in the description. We're at the back of the car, but in front of our tank here is our pickup, and it is held on with some hard line. If yours happens to be soft line, you could probably just, cut it off, but ours is hard. So we're gonna take a 1/2 inch line wrench, and we're just gonna remove that fitting off of our tank. There we go, fuel line removed. Now we can just remove the little nut holding this under on. So now I'm gonna grab a 5/16 wrench and remove the nut for our sender here. There we go, get that guy out of there. Now we can focus on physically removing the tank. So right here is what holds the filler neck to the car, and this is going to vary. Like on my Camaro, it didn't have anything like this that held it to the side. It just has 3 bolts on the back, so you're going to have to assess your own situation. And I have assessed that we have to remove this 7/16 bolt. There we go. So before we begin lowering our tank down, you will need to empty your tank. As you can hear, that's what an empty tank sounds like. Fortunately enough, ours had a drain, which is honestly pretty rare. You're most likely going to have to siphon yours out, or at least down to a level where it doesn't weigh 1,000,000 pounds. And I have a link down below in the description to show you exactly how to do that safely. Otherwise, who knows how much gas is in there, and it can get really out of control really fast. You're much better off siphoning the gasoline out. So I have my transmission jack helping me out here. Truth be told, if you have an empty tank and you're doing it on the ground, you could probably just have somebody, hold it, because it's not super heavy when it's empty. Alternatively, you could just use a regular jack as well. If you put it in the middle, maybe like a plank of wood or something, you could balance that pretty good and get the tank out of here if you're by yourself. Since we're on a hoist, I'm going to go ahead and get my transmission jack up into position. So with our gas tank nice and supported, we can grab a 9/16 socket and remove the nuts holding it. Well, that was easy. The only thing supporting our gas tank is our transmission jack. So now we can let our gas tank down slowly. And honestly, with the filler neck still attached, it's probably not going to be too graceful, but we're just going to do our best and try to, position it and finagle it out of there as easily as we can. So on this particular model, it's actually looks really difficult to get the filler neck off of it. On a lot of other like muscle car era cars, you can actually just remove the rubber boot that connects the filler tube to the tank. But on this one, I think it's going to be easier to just rotate the neck like this, and then we'll be able to kind of guide it out of there. So now we can let her down. Honestly, it's pretty light. I could probably just handle it like that. Very cool. Oh, and Christmas has come early because what is in this box was delivered by our friends at Summit Racing, the closest thing I'm going to get to Santa Claus. And this is a brand new fuel tank for our Bel Air that contains our fuel pickup and our fuel pump. So let's get out of the box. So our tank also came with an in-tank fuel level sender. That's this device right here, and I'll show you how to set up that in just a moment. And then it also has kind of the star of the show here, and this is going to be our fuel pump. There it is, right there, rated for 100 PSI. And we're gonna have to set that up as well because this is a kit that you can adjust, so you can adjust where it sits in the fuel tank, and it's important to get that right. It also comes with a sock for the bottom of the fuel pump, as well as the wiring harness for it. Pretty easy, red power, black ground. So we're going to be putting in our sender first. I like to do it that way. You could put the pump in first, but it really doesn't matter. The first thing we're going to do is measure from the bottom of the tank to the top of where this flange is going to sit. And I've already measured it off camera, and it is 6.5 inches. We know that it's 6.5 inches, so we want this pivot to be halfway towards the top. That way you have a full range of motion. Otherwise, it wouldn't know what is bottom and what is top float-wise, and your gasoline measurement will never be correct one way or the other. So we're gonna have to put that at 3.25 inches. So on my whiteboard, I have drawn basically a side cutout, like a profile view of our gas tank. It's actually more like 6.25 inches deep, not 6.5. I measured it again, always measure twice. So I have our sender adjusted so that way this distance from the flange where it mounts down to this pivot point is 3 1/8 inches, exactly half of this distance. So we have the correct throw on our float, and the float should always be mounted on the side like mine is right now. And I've already done this, so you can see that when it is down at the bottom, it's not like touching the bottom, but it's pretty close. And then when it's full, again, not touching the top, but pretty close. So now this has the correct range. If yours doesn't look like that, go ahead and loosen this screw and adjust it. It's going to be different for every application as far as tank depth goes. As from what I gather, this is actually a pretty shallow tank. Most tanks are deeper, especially if you're running like a fuel cell or something. And then once you're sure that your range is perfect, like ours is, you can go ahead and trim off the excess, as long as you do it after this little kick out here on my pointer finger, because you want it to be able to bonk against there to prevent this from just spinning and flapping over and becoming useless. So after you've looked inside and you see which baffling is where, and I've noticed that the float being over here on my left, your guys' right, is probably the best spot. There's nothing that's going to hit in the way. However, this plate only goes onto the tank one way. The plate you can't clock. However, there is a nut here and a nut here that you can loosen, and you can actually clock the entire sender, which I've already done. It was 180'd. It was actually pointing over here into the fuel pump cavity, and we don't want that, so it needs to point away from it. So we've already done that, and it'll go on nice and easy. And look, I've already marked my quart gasket here, so all the holes line up. And then I've also marked my flange here. And we can put the sender in, float forward first at an angle. Might have to finagle it a little bit. Perfect. And then put that down in there, line up your gasket and the flange. And the holes only line up one way, so if you are confused and the gasket's not lining up and this isn't lining up, it's because the clock of the actual sender itself is incorrect, and you need to take that back out and readjust it. It is no big deal though, because they make these senders for a bunch of different applications, so it may not be exactly bespoke, but it will work with a little bit of thinking and a little bit of modification. And we're just gonna put in our very special bolts that came with our kit. Link, of course, is in the description. These are cool because they have that little O-ring, that little seal on there for us. And we're just gonna put those in. Start those finger tight for right now, literally with our fingers. And then we're gonna grab a 5/16 nut driver, and we're just gonna put those down as evenly as we can in a star pattern. And go over it a couple of times in a star pattern, because as the gasket compresses, the clamping forces and loosens, and you don't want to have any kind of leak here. So just go around in a star pattern, maybe like 3 times, to make sure you get all the squedge out of there. And don't go crazy tight on it, just wrist tight with a nut driver is really enough. So I have part of our fuel pump assembly here, and we can see from the top, R is for return, S is for send, so our, kind of clear translucent straw is going to be our return, so that's going to be fed back into the tank. And we don't want that all the way down to the bottom, so that way it's plugged. And then we don't want it too high up too, so it puts air into the gas and it might cause problems on the pump side. So we want to put that at, we know the tank's about 6 1/4, so we're going to put ours at like 5 1/2. So what we can do is take our measuring tape and measure from the flange down, and we're just going to mark that right at 5 1/2. There we go, perfect. And then we can worry about our fuel pump, because it does not necessarily just drop in and you're ready to go. You have to have the whole assembly, and it has to, both of these tubes have to be cut to length. So what I'm going to do is take our fuel pump, put our sock on the bottom of it. There we go. So basically we need this to be sitting somewhere on this tube to where the distance from the flange surface to the bottom of the sock is about 6 inches. I know the total depth is 6 1/4, but I really don't want it smothered against the bottom of the tank like this. You probably could get away with that because it has a little bit of bracing in here to prevent you from collapsing it in on the pump and starving the pump. But I'm gonna give it a little more breathing room, so I'm gonna go 6 inches flat. Give us that 1/4 inch of extra breathing room on that. However, you don't want to go too far up, because then you might be shortchanging yourself on how low you can run your tank. So that's 6 inches. So we want this to be bottomed out at 6 inches. which is like right there. As a result, we need to cut it right about here. I know it's a black Sharpie on a black straw, but the mark is right. Oh, you can see that right there. So that is where we're going to cut that bad boy. So we're going to ignore this one, and we're going to cut this one and then this one. So I've cut our straws to length. I just used a razor blade, cuts through it pretty good. And we can attach our fuel pump. And what you want to do is look down in the tank and see if there's any kind of baffling. There's actually a little bit going like this. So I'm going to put mine like this back towards where there's no baffling. So we want this clocked towards me, because this would be basically the front of the car where I'm standing. So we can go ahead and put that on our black straw. Don't forget your hose clamp. So I have my straw fully seated on my fuel pump. I'm gonna go ahead and put on the supplied hose clamp, grab a 1/4-inch nut driver, and just tighten that bad boy down behind the barb so we don't get any kind of fuel leaks or lack of fuel pressure or low fuel pressure. And just wrist tight is perfectly good. So what we want to do is feed our wires through these holes in the flange. It doesn't matter really which one goes where. I'm going to line it up so it's nice and straight. And we're just going to pull those through. And then orientate the plug so it can go right onto our fuel pump, and you'll hear a nice click. Just like that. You can see that it's in its home because that safety is nice and locked up and you can't pull it back out. And then we have our wonderful wires here for routing. So then what we can do is grab a 9mm open end wrench, and we're just going to tighten the collet down, and what that's going to do is go and seal on our wire so we don't have any kind of leak that we don't want. We don't want weather getting in there because on top of the gas tank, weather does get nice and snug. Do that for the ground as well. All right. That looks perfect. Check it out. It's like our little cute, fuel pump. So that's awesome. So what we can do is put down our core gasket, line that up. This one doesn't seem to be as fussy as the Sunder. And then we can put our sock in and our pump. Oh yeah. There we go. I was actually hung up on one of the hose clamp tangs for just a moment there. And then we can just spin our gasket until it's lined up, and then clock this until it lines up with the holes. And then of course we can take our special bolts that came with our kit, and I'm just gonna start those. I'm not clamping nothing down yet. And then of course once you get them all started, we can just start tightening them down in as much as a star pattern as we can. You don't want to go too crazy tight on this because you can split that gasket easy peasy. Just go a couple times around. Wrist tight will really be sufficient. There we go. Our fuel pump's installed. So now we can do some more prep work. I have this pre-made wire. I just had some black wire and a nice eyelet laying around, and what we can do is attach that to the ground side for our sender. Because it's all isolated and in rubber and cork, you definitely need this ground for it to work. Go ahead and put our ground on, followed by our washer, then our lock washer, and our little teeny tiny nut. And I'm just going to tighten this down like finger tight with a 9/32 wrench. It seriously does not need to be super tight. That's plenty. And I have it clocked so it's facing the front of the car towards me. I also have this wire quite long. I've left it maybe 3 feet long because I'd rather have too much wire than not enough. So now what we can do is take some 5/16 fuel line and go ahead and put it on our vent. And this is absolutely essential so that way contaminants don't get into here. And also, as you'll see later, we're going to put on a device that prevents gasoline from flowing out of here in the event of a rollover. So we can go ahead and slide our hose clamp into position. And links to the fuel line, these hose clamps, some of the tools I've been using are available down below in the description. Just snug that up. Oh, that looks perfect. So with our vent tube hose on, you'll also see that I've left it fairly long. I have about 5 feet of tubing here because I'm not going to be able to get to this once the tank is in the car, so I won't be able to change it, or it'd be very difficult to. So there are a couple of different ways you can go about with these fittings. These are 3/8 NPT threading, or National Pipe Thread. Fairly common fitting. You could adapt that to a barb, like a 5/16 barbs or something like that, and you could run your fuel lines just like that, easy peasy. I don't really like doing that just because the propensity for it to kink is there, and I really like the way AN stuff looks. So Summit went over and sent us these bad boys, and what this is a 3/8 male to -6 male fitting. So we can use AN stuff on this MPT threading. So that's pretty cool. So we can go ahead and put these adapters in. So we can go ahead and install that fitting. Since it is a -6 fitting, you can use a -6 wrench to snug that bad boy up. Ah, that feels great. Okay, so you do this exact same thing to this side. So what I have before you is basically what we're going to be using for our entire fuel line, and that is 20 feet of Summit Racing branded -6 nylon AN line, and they sent that over. Fantastic. Link down below in the description, and then the associated fittings to go along with it. I already have a video on how to install a fitting onto a line. The link is down below in there. I'd appreciate if you go check that out. I'll answer all your questions in depth, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take these two fittings and put them on the ends of this. And you might be asking me, well, why are you leaving it so darn long? That's so when the tank is up and in the car, I have somewhere to go. I can trim things, I can, you know, have some slack, and I don't have to keep taking the tank down and back up. So I'm just going to put this fitting on there and this fitting on there. So I have our AN lines attached to our hose here. I'm just going to start that with my fingers until it gets too tight. And look at that. Doesn't that just look like $1,000,000 freaking bucks? Yes. Take a -6 wrench, and we are going to tighten that nut. And don't go crazy Hulk tight. Just wrist tight is perfectly fine. Like that. Absolutely fine. Perfect. Look at that. Now our gas tank just needs its filler neck and it can go in the car. So it's also important before you get too excited and you put this up and you can't remember which one is which. I've marked it with my Sharpie. This is send and this is return, because if you hook this up backwards, your fuel system's not going to work and you're basically going to have to take the whole thing back apart and you know, switch these over. So I've already replaced the mounting hardware here and here for our gas tank, and now I'm going to replace the straps that actually came with our kit. It is like ridiculously easy. All you have to do is lift up and out just like that. Super, super easy. So you just lift up and back. It is super easy to get rid of these and just as easy to install them. Here's my new ones sent over by Summit Racing. They came in our kit. Link down below in the description. And yours are going to be bespoke to your vehicle, so make sure you get the gas tank straps for your car. And go ahead and put them on both sides. So now the tank is more or less in position. It's about a foot down from the bottom of the trunk, and we can take our sender wire, which I've attached about a foot or so of small gauge wire with a nice eyelet. So that way I can put this on while the tank is still down a decent a ways. That way I cause as little headache to myself as possible. And we can just snug that up with this teeny tiny wrench. Doesn't need to be Hulk tight, just snug like that's perfectly good. And so you can see that before I put the tank up, I have our, our fuel lines, our vent, all the wires are in this cubby. They can't be on the sides because they might get smashed or pinched, and the tank won't fit right. It'll be a mess. So all those need to be right in this nice cubby coming towards the front of the car, right in between where the straps go. So with our straps already kind of going in the middle of the tank, making sure nothing's pinched, just look around and we can start lifting this thing into position. So next thing we can do is put on a jam nut that came with our kit. We'll just put that on there, anywhere on there, because we can adjust that later. Now that the tank is pretty much where it's going to be, we can put the strap on one of them. Put on our little bracket there, and then I have a lock washer. Put that on as well, and then our nut. Awesome. So do that for right now, and for the other side as well. So it's a little bit of a dance to get your straps under the correct tension. What you certainly don't want is to be able to put your hand through like this, but you can also crush the tank if you put too much pressure on it. So what I like to do is put the jam nut up a little bit. We're gonna actually use that jam nut to tighten everything back down. I like to grab an impact gun and just start tightening it down until it gets snug, but not crushing Hulk tight. It really doesn't need to be super, super tight. In fact, I think that's just about perfect. There we go, that looks pretty good. There's a teensy bit of a gap here, but honestly not bad. There's nothing here and nothing on the back side, and I can't even jiggle the tank around. Like I said, you don't want to crush it. So then get our jam nut, lower that down on top of the fitting there, and then just tighten that up using a 9/16 wrench. Absolutely perfect. Do the exact same thing for this side over here. So now we can replace our filler neck. It's a little difficult to see in there, but heck, I can barely see in there. And I have the O-ring nice and lubricated, as well as where it's going nice and lubricated. There we go. It kind of has like a little shelf. Like if you push in, it kind of goes doop, and then that's it. It doesn't go any further than that. And then we can swing it back up into its standard position, which is right about there. Perfect. Filler neck back installed. And of course, don't forget to replace your drain plug if you have one. This one's nice because it's pretty good size, so if you ever need to drain the tank, it'd be quite easy. And then it was just a 9/16 socket. And it actually already came with pipe thread on it, which is just great. We're just gonna snug that down. Like that. Gonna go ahead and go around, give a little tour of what we did. That is what I just tightened on the filler neck. That leads to our gas tank right there. A little tricky to see. There we go. Goes in right there. Here's what our straps look like, fully mounted and in their homes. They look absolutely perfect. They look brand new, because they are. Well, they look like $1 million. How about that? And then kind of the thing we were working on most is right up here. Right up here we can see all our tubes and wires aren't pinched by anything and are coming out the front of the tank towards the underbelly of the car, and that is going to leave us plenty of slack to work with when we are ready to plumb and wire this bad boy. So that is how to put a gas tank for an EFI swap, LS swap in your older American vehicle. It is pretty simple, straightforward, but there are a lot of steps you gotta pay attention to and those small nuances I went over. Thank you so much for watching. If this video has helped at all, please consider giving a like. All applicable links are located down below in the description. Thank you, Summit Racing, for sponsoring this series, and I'll see you next time.